Thank you very much. So hello, everyone. And it's so nice to see many new as well as known faces today on Zoom. Thank you for joining from many countries in Europe, North and South America, for our 12th virtual Coffee for Yogi, reflecting on the multi-year long pandemic. Just one housekeeping instruction, please stay muted and we will leave time for your questions. So please then raise your virtual hand or put your question in the chat. So why is this conversation? As we enter the second year of the pandemic, the length of which was not anticipated, we are still asking ourselves, how do we find and cultivate resilience? How do we continue to maintain our health and spirit and even thrive in this situation? This global conversation aims to give us perspective on our lives in the time of COVID. Some of us live in societies with different response to COVID. Some have opened the society and some needed to close them again as the COVID situation changed. For example, what is happening now in Australia. How do we continue to adapt to this ever-changing COVID landscape? This difficult global pandemic has brought and is still bringing much suffering worldwide. Only 1% of Africa is currently vaccinated. It has also created a need for connection without border. Way back in March 2020, we saw that by January 2021, we would be free of this pandemic and be back face to face. This was not to come. For some, yes, we are getting vaccinated, even booster shots. Some are returning to studio in hybrid forms, and yet others around the world are experiencing even more challenges. We are still dealing with some of the same issue of uncertainty, fear, and also with the realization that we have post-COVID survivors, long COVID, breakthrough cases, all creating new sets of challenges personally and collectively. We are still in need to adjust our lives and expectation at this time and maybe facing new challenges as the virus mutates. So how can yoga help us respond, adapt with resilience and grace to this ever-changing situation? So thanks to the technology of Zoom, in this virtual coffee, we have been reaching out to senior Ayanga teachers worldwide, creating a global community of yogis interested in reflecting on our yogic practices during this time. My hope has been, and still is, that by hearing the different voices of our senior teachers, we can learn from each other, feel connected as we strengthen, explore the many aspects of our yoga practices in this time of crisis. So our guest today is Sheila Haswell, a senior Ayanga yoga teacher since 2000. Sheila has been teaching yoga for over 40 years and has devoted most of her working life to studying, teaching, and promoting Ayanga yoga for healing. She's currently an approved Ayanga yoga teacher trainer, as well as a moderator and assessor for the Ayanga Yoga Association of the UK. Sheila credits her mother, Lillian Biggs, to introducing her to Ayanga yoga. Lillian Biggs, a senior teacher on her own, became her first mentor. One of your students, Sheila, sent us a note saying, "Sheila, you are incredible, dedicated, and do so much. How do you manage to find time and keep so wonderfully positive?" Indeed, when I first met you, Sheila, your dedication to the wellness of your students and your positive attitude shines through. So without further ado, let me ask you, if you had to only name one benefit that Ayanga yoga has given you, what would it be?
Okay, Rahel, thank you for inviting me. What would it be? Benefit? Do you know, for me, actually, I think it's an anchor. It's something that grounds you. And when I first came to yoga, I didn't really know what it was, but I realized quite soon that it was something that I could go to and feel safe and feel secure in. And so though things have changed over the years, I think that is the benefit. It's always there, something you can turn to. And although yoga changes as we change, it's still a subject that we can immerse ourselves in at whatever level is appropriate. So for me, yes, it's been an anchor, and it has been different throughout the years. There's no question about that. I'm not retired. I mean, I'm still teaching, but I could be retired because, you know, my age gives me that possibility. But I'm also a mother of 3, a grandmother of 2, and all of the challenges of having them has changed how yoga has been in my life. But yes, it's always been there as an anchor.
So can you reflect a little bit about your history in yoga? Can you tell us something about your coming and staying, and maybe your family lineage that shaped your approach to teaching?
Okay, so there's a lot of people in this virtual coffee that don't know me at all. There's quite a few who might have heard this story before, but I was a teenage gymnast, and I'm talking, I didn't just go to the local gym. I was competing at a high level, and then I went to university, and my gym career was over. I was past 18, and Olga Corbett had come on the scene, and she was a young, tiny thing. And those of us that were a bit older, we're no longer in the national squad. So I was at university. I'd missed that. My father had unexpectedly died in the summer just before I went to university, and I felt a little lost. So this is when I talk about the anchor. Because during that time that I was away, that's when my mum found Ayanga yoga, and she found light on yoga. She first borrowed it from the library, and she realized that this was something she really wanted to get into, and she knew I would be interested. So she ordered 2 copies, and she sent one to me at university. And I can remember clearly, it was February 1973 when that dropped through my postbox at university. And I just devoured it. I mean, I opened the book and I loved the pictures, and I couldn't find a teacher. So I basically got on and practiced. The funny thing is, now I look back, it's funny. I practiced twice a day, 6 days a week from aged 18, except on a Sunday, because I was a bit worried I might get addicted. And here I am. So I actually made a conscious decision to give myself a day off just in case. And it took me a while to find a teacher. My mum became my teacher because she went to India in the early mid 70s to Pune. She met Miss Triangle in London first, and she was quite hooked by then. And then I followed on later. So she was my teacher, and my brother became a teacher. My children did some yoga, but they're not all into it at the moment, but they all have a knowledge of. But yeah, I suppose it was me and my mum. And then we traveled to India together many times to study there. So yeah, she was my teacher.
Yeah.
She's been gone now 16 years, but she's still my teacher. Everything she's there, it still comes back into my head, into my practice. Yeah.
That's a very beautiful story, and being very, very grateful to your mom to have, and it's really touching story. So I'd like to move a little bit from this history, and we'll come back to your teaching and how the practice has changed through the years, but I'd like to go straight into the UK COVID situation and the influences on your center and the teaching practices. So can you take us through, so what happened from the pandemic? Are you now in the studio? Are you doing hybrid? We really don't know. Different countries are doing different things. So what is it that you are doing, and what did you do at the beginning? What happened? Did you have to close? This kind of for us to understand where you stand in the UK with that COVID situation.
Okay, so I think it's very different in different areas of the UK, but where I am, we started the pandemic. I was actually not well. I had just traveled back from Europe, and I had a 48-hour stay in hospital with an infection down here in my pharynx. which meant that I couldn't swallow. So I was 48 hours in hospital and on drips and things. And when I came out, I was told I couldn't work for 2 weeks because it might come back. And during that 2 weeks, that's when the pandemic was really sort of picking itself up. This was the beginning of May. And I think it was about the 15th of May when we were asked to close down. And I hadn't actually got back to teaching by then. So I knew nothing of the technology. I didn't know about the Zoom platform. None of us knew how long this was going to go on for. And I have to say, looking back now, it seems a little callous, but what I actually thought to myself was, somebody said to me, are you going to teach on Zoom? And I went, no. You know, I've been teaching my students for 40 years. If they can't manage a few weeks on their own, then what have I been doing it for? Those are my thoughts. And now I look back and it's like, that was really not the right thing. But I think I was also myself just unsure of the situation and probably a little exhausted from my own health at the time. Mm-hmm. So we closed the studio, assuming it would be a short closure. And of course, it just went on and then went on. And what actually got me into doing the Zoom work was I was teaching alongside Gita Bexgard, and she's been featured on your coffees. So I was teaching alongside her, and she and Gloria and I have been teaching together, and they were going to be working on Zoom. And it was like, okay, I've got to learn this. But I wasn't ready straight away to put my own classes there. I guess it was a nervousness of teaching on Zoom. I'm really the sort of person who likes to be with people. I like to be able to see them and adjust them and be in contact. So this felt a very strange situation. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I got into that. And then we were, I guess, let me think, we were allowed to open last year between September and October. And so I took some classes back to my studio. And then in November, everything had to close down. So we had to bring everything back onto Zoom. And I got used to the Zoom platform. And a lot of people have told me how much they have benefited from it, the teaching that we've had together. But in fact, for me, it's never going to be the way forward I want to go. Because you can see behind me, this is the room that I'm teaching in. The bit you can't see just over here is my desk. Behind those curtains is my bookcases. This is my office. It used to be a storage area. And so during the closure of the pandemic, I did my work in here. I did my practice in here. I did my mantras in here. And it felt like I was almost entombed. There was just me and this screen. And so it was such a lovely feeling to go back into the big studio. Mm-hmm. So we came back to the studio. We had lockdown from November through till I think February, March. And then we came back into the studio into spring. And now in the UK, we don't have any restrictions that are enforced upon us. Any restrictions you have now are what you might call your own common sense. Mm-hmm. So mask wearing, social distancing, but you have to also remember that in the UK, we are now probably nearly 80% vaccinated. Mm-hmm. And so they're using that as a way of saying, okay, if you're vaccinated, you are much more likely to be safer. So I've waffled a bit. I don't know if I've answered your question. I can't remember all the nuances of the question, but certainly, yes, I was reluctant to go to Zoom. I went there because I felt I had to. I'm glad I did. Don't get me wrong. I'm glad I did, but I am enjoying being in the studio.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So how did your personal practice change and how did your teaching change throughout the pandemic?
Again, it's a really difficult situation to answer, because I wasn't well at the beginning of the pandemic, and I also, who knows what was wrong, but it manifested in this this condition in my throat. But I ended up with a really bad back problem, joint problem last year. So my practice changed a lot. I did a lot more restorative, a lot more sitting. And I don't know if you can see, but in the corner over there are the legs of my Puna trestle, the Puna horse or the trestle. I had to bring the portable trestle home because I could only do standing poses with support. I've got beyond that, but it means my practice has completely varied from a year and a half ago to now, from before the pandemic, where I had quite an active practice, to being a much more sort of quiet led practice. And I think I did what I felt my body needed, because your head can sometimes take over and you think you ought to do. And then when I did the classes with Abhijata and Prashant, I just put myself with the trestle for all the standing poses, because I couldn't support myself well enough. And those of people who've been coming to my classes will know that there are certain things I can't show everybody now, but I can show how to do. And I think that's the difference. So no, I'm not back to full capacity, but certainly for me, I felt that the practice, it had to adapt. It had to adapt to the situation. It had to adapt to the fact that I was enclosed in this room, the fact that I was looking after my own issues, and then of course that I was teaching. One of the things that Zoom has allowed is for you to teach people without actually being in the pose. You can't do that all of the time because they need to see what you're doing. But for instance, there's no way I can show Shivasana and Savangasana and teach everybody. So I would do those in my own time, and in the teaching time would instruct what their requirements were. Mm-hmm. And this might sound like a really silly observation from what you've asked me, but I don't know if you can see, I am wearing glasses. They're fairly good at hiding on my face, but I am wearing glasses. And when I've been teaching on Zoom, I've had to do all my yoga in my glasses. I've never done that before. They're always put to the side for yoga. So it's quite nice to take them off for practice, because in teaching, I've had to do this. And it feels a little strange.
It's really very interesting what you just said about we think we ought to do it this way, and that the pandemic has taught us maybe that we need to change that attitude to what ought to be our yoga practice. And that for me is a segue into that beautiful, important tool that you have created, the recovery booklet, and also that video that you, in video form. So you have been involved in the long haul COVID program and study, and now you are now developing this in the UK. So how can you speak a little bit about what made you go there? What kind of practices you have been developing? If you can talk about the booklet, which is pretty impressive. I've been reading it and I've said, this is such an important tool for everybody to learn. And what does it mean, the long haul COVID? And what are we discovering now that we are looking at this from this angle?
Okay, so that booklet and video began because Uday Bosale, who many people will know, he's from Pune, international teacher, resident in the UK. Uday and his wife Sonali decided to do an event to raise money for the National Health Service in the UK, the NHS. And they asked a few people if we would teach. So I was one of the 6 people that they asked if we would teach. luckily, he also invited Abhijata, so she was one of our teachers on that day. And we talked to about 700 people, which was wonderful. But the day after he had asked us to do that, I remember I was waking up in the morning and thinking, but surely, rather than just teaching yoga for the NHS to raise money, which is brilliant, maybe we should do something for the COVID sufferers. So I called him and we talked about what was possible. Now, it just happens that at the moment, I'm chair of the therapy committee in the UK. So I got the therapy team together and said, you know, we should do something for this. So we agreed to add on an extra session the following morning. And it was put together very, very quickly, but we built it really on, Lois Steinberg had already done quite a lot of work on the respiratory system, and she'd put out a leaflet about that. So we worked from that and built up, well, what are we going to do for people who are in their homes and they're not in a studio and they don't have so many props, or somebody telling them what to do. So we did this, and then we had different members of the therapy committee were set up with sofas, dining chairs, yoga props, and showing different ways that people could work. And it went very well, this 2-hour video that we did. And that was done live. So what you see, and if you go onto that video to watch it, the trailer, which is the very beginning, the introduction, I did afterwards because I knew it was then going to be out there. But the rest of it was done live to a live audience. We'd had one practice. But at the end of it, one of the participants said to me, can I take screenshots and make an ebook? And we said, well, no, that's our job. So as a committee, we then took to producing them and making that booklet. Mm-hmm. And all credit to the people on the committee and to Adrienne Bagnall, who was the graphic designer who we worked with. She's one of our teachers, because we were still in full lockdown. They had to take their own photographs. They had family member taking their photos. And then if it wasn't it wasn't good enough for Adrienne to put in the ebook, she would tell us. And we spent all of that summer getting that together. And it was, yes, it's a good resource. And I think what drove us, Rahel, is that we realized by then a lot of people were going to be suffering from COVID, and it wasn't something that was just going to be over and done within a few weeks and it was going away. So this is something that people were going to need ongoing. So we felt, okay, we need to get this out now. So we spent the summer working on it. Mm-hmm. But in terms of the long COVID, or what you call in the States and on that side of the Atlantic, you call long haulers. In the UK, we call it long COVID. But what's happened with that is that, yes, it's not just about people who have COVID. There are people who have had it and now have a lot of health issues from that. So right now we are putting together, and it starts in October, first week of October. We are putting together a 10-week pilot study where there are going to be, I've got some statistics here. We've got 110 teachers in the UK. They're not all based in the UK, but they're all members of IY UK. So some of them are based in other European countries. We've got 110 helper teachers, 10 main therapy teachers, 20 cover teachers, and 55 participants who have long COVID. And they're all going to be working on a program together. And it's each person with long COVID has 2 teachers helping them in a Zoom room and 1 main therapy teacher overseeing 5 or 6 of the breakout Zoom rooms. And they will be interviewed and given a program to suit their health needs, because COVID, long COVID sufferers or people who have that condition, they don't have one condition. They might come with what they already had, but now they have new conditions. And so they're going to be helped. And over the 10 weeks, each time they do a session, they fill in a form to say whether they have got benefit from it. They can talk to their teachers. The program will be adapted. And then we are having some university students who will be doing this as part of their uni programs. They're going to do an analysis of this. The hope might be that we actually can use NHS funding to do a bigger project which can go out more nationwide. At the moment, the participants that we have in the study have been taken from members or members' families who know of yoga, even if they're not all participating. But of course, the wider public might need this as well at some point.
I see. So this is, so looking at the booklet and looking at the way you go about the importance of the breath creates for me a question connecting to the influence of our yoga postures and the breath in COVID, but only from COVID, on our mind. And so COVID has also influenced the way we have seen what's happening to our mind and to our attitude and perception of ourselves. So could you please address, I'm not sure, am I clear what I'm asking? I'm seeing that in your booklet, breath has become really an important. Of course, this disease of COVID is in the respiratory, so the breath is really, really affected from that. But breath for the Ayanga, and you quote Ayanga, wherever space and stillness is created, prana flows. And that's basically how the breath create a quiet mind. So how do you think our attitudes through COVID have changed regarding to the breath and to the way to quiet the mind?
Okay, there's a lot in there. So the thing that comes up for me is space. And I remember from my very early days of being taught yoga, being told it's about creation of space. Space for the joints to have ease of movement, space for all of the body organs to exist in the way they're meant to, space for our lungs to work, and also space so that our vessels, the blood and the lymph can move easily. And of course that translates into space in the mind. So there's a little, I guess there's a little bit of conflict here, because what the COVID pandemic has meant is for a lot of us, we're now connected to this screen. And for me, that takes me out of the space I want to create in here. And so I think we've got to be watchful that when we don't have that personal contact with people, that we don't make that contact through the screen draw us into that situation and lose the sense of becoming quiet in our own space. So although I said earlier about this being like a small box that I'm working in, it's also an absolutely wonderful haven where I close the door. This is my space. And I can just be in a yoga pose and nobody would bother me. Mm-hmm. And I think one of the things that maybe COVID has taught us is that we can't rush around. People who've got that, yes, their breath is affected, but they have to find a place where they can be in a pose. So a lot of the work in that booklet is on getting into a supported asana and spending time in that asana, but spending time not just because the clock says I've got to do 5 minutes, but it's spending time with your awareness. Because if your awareness is I've got a niggle in my back and I need to get up, then staying because the clock says you haven't yet done 5 minutes is wrong. So it's finding the space to observe. I think that might be a way to say it. So we can't get away from this. In the sutras, and Guruji talks about it, about the idea of the body being a whole set of sheaths. And the physical outer sheath is the first one. So for instance, if the heart is sunk and the shoulders are in, this is a closed space. There's a heaviness. And, you know, when you're in this position, it's really hard to feel sort of uplifted and healthy. So what we have to do is create that. That's the physical body, but it affects the mind. There's a wonderful cartoon. People who come to my studio have seen it. It's on the door of my little office cupboard. And it's Charlie Brown. I don't know if people are familiar with Charlie Brown, the cartoon character. And he says at the beginning, "This is my depressed stance." He said, "You've got to stand like this if you want to get the most out of being depressed, because the minute you stand up straight, you start feeling better." Wow. And that is really the essence. We've got to start with the physical. The physical body creates the space. The breath is the next body, the breath body, the pranayama, the pranamaya kosha. So when you create the space, the breath has more space to move. And I'm not talking just the physical breath in the lungs, I'm talking the essence of that, the energy of that, the prana which is in the body. It has the space to move. And then the next sheath is the manamaya kosha, the mental sheath. So if you can create space in the physical body, the breath body, the mind has the opportunity. Doesn't mean it will go there, because the mind is fickle, it moves fast and it goes places, but it has the opportunity to move into that space and find some stillness. Mm-hmm. But this screen drags us out there. You know, in Ayanga yoga, anybody who's been in classes will know Gita Ayanga says, remove the specs, meaning the spectacles, meaning the glasses, take them off. Because in a restorative pose, you can't have this. She said, this is to bring you out. The specs are to mean that you can see what's out there. So take them off, close the eyes, go in. Mm-hmm. And I'm hoping that is, I'm hoping I've answered your question. I get carried away. I hear a bit of it and I move on. But yes, I think if we can find stillness, and it can be in any asana, it doesn't have to be in a restorative asana. It's just find that stillness. And here's another thing that came from Guruji. When he was teaching one time, Adhishandrasana, and he said to us, don't hang on to the balance. He said, if you can feel that space and that openness for a few moments, these might not be his exact words. I'm just remembering what I remember from it. If you can hold on to that balance for a few moments before you come out of the pose, then at least you have found something. But if you just stay closed into balance, you never experienced it. Mm-hmm, 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 mm-hmm. Mm.
So what I'm getting from what you're saying, many things, but one of the most important is having patience, right? Is having a patience and looking clearly of what is really happening in your own space, right? And not looking outside. But then the question comes, so how do we learn to surrender to that patience? How do we learn to surrender to the situation? And that's what the pandemic was all about. It was really something that was put on us. We didn't choose that. So how do we learn to surrender to the situation and to the patience that you spoke about, just spoke about?
I think if I can use an example.
Sure.
In 2000, Guruji taught, I think it was 10 days in Pune for teachers who had to have at least 10 years experience. And one of the poses, he held us a long time in many of them. And I was a little afraid of holding certain poses too long. But I didn't even think about it in Adho Mukha Svanasana. Nobody told us how long we were going to stay. And the only reason I know how long is that certain people were allowed to attend the event as spectators. And some of them had timed these poses. So we did Adho Mukha Svanasana. And we had no props or supports. We were just on our mat. And it was a full 10 minutes from start to finish. Now, the experience was what went on in my mind. This is what I'd like to share, because for me, this was a turning point in my whole understanding of my practice. So we didn't know how long we were going to stay. I'm in Adho Mukha Svanasana. I was quite an active yogi in the sense that I'm doing everything I think I should do, you know, turning the arms, moving my shoulders, active through the legs. And probably 2 or 3 minutes in, my mind starts going, when are we coming out of this? You know, it didn't have words, but it had that feeling of, I'm ready to come out. I was almost willing him to say, come down. But it went on and it went on. And then a strange thought came into my mind, and it said, what if this is all there is in my life now? I am here and this is all that is for me. I have to learn to be in this situation. And I stopped trying hard and started feeling the pose. And another thought went through my head, which is a little strange, and it does connect with the pandemic. I thought, perhaps this is what it's like to be in prison, where you're not allowed to do everything you want to do. Anyway, that was a fleeting thought in my mind, but I was in the pose. And then when he said, come down, I didn't think, oh, thank goodness for that. I was like, oh, okay. And we came out of the pose. So the lesson I'm trying to put here is that I think when a situation comes where you are confined, this is for confined yogis, this event, when you are confined, you have to make something of that confinement. And if you fight against it, then you're never going to feel what it's like to be in that space. And I guess the other thing was that when we came out of the pandemic, my thought was not, I have to get out there, I'm going to a nightclub, I'm going to go swimming, I'm going to go on holiday. I didn't feel that need. Maybe it's because I felt in the confinement of yoga in my own space, I felt some contentment. But when you watch the news, you see there was a lot of people who were going absolutely crazy in that confinement and they needed to get out. So maybe yoga gave us that, those of us who were doing yoga practice, it gave us that sense of being able to be in that space and not feel like we have to be elsewhere. But just an add-on to that, I am an avid news watcher. So I do like to watch the news and make sure that I know what's happening in the world. And I think one of the things that I had to do was to have sort of empathy for those people, even though I couldn't do much for everybody who was really suffering. I couldn't do my part, but what I could do was not fight against the situation and try and, you know, just use my own quietness and thoughts to be with people.
So that for me brings me to the question, how do we learn to trust ourselves in our own practice? How do we learn to trust the voice that says it is fine to be in this present moment? It is fine to have the patience. It is fine not to know what's going to happen. How does yoga help us do that?
I believe that yoga puts you in the sense of being in the moment. Mm-hmm. And one of the things I've been saying to people in this last week in their practice, well, in their Shavasana, is that quite often we lie in Shavasana. While we're in a yoga practice, we can stay working on the body. So we stay present with ourselves because we have to move this, move that. Teacher's seen that, told you what to do. You feel a niggle, you go to that. So you stay with it. When it comes to Shavasana, which Guruji said is one of the hardest of the asanas, and of course beginners think we're being a bit silly saying that because they're just happy to lie down. But of course it's because the mind starts to shift. So one of the things I have been saying this week is, once you've stilled the body and you've paid attention to the senses and trying to bring them in, you have to say, well, what does the mind want to do? It likes to grab onto memories and be in the past. It likes to jump into the future. What will happen after this moment? And the hardest bit is to be in the present. And I think sometimes in an asana, we've got to say, well, in this moment, I've got a problem with my knee, my back, my neck's hurting, whatever it is. I can't be in what I expect to be my best pose. I can only be in best for this moment. And one of the things that I don't remember actual wording, but Guruji said something along the lines of perfection is for God. So perfection in a yoga pose is not going to happen in this human body. All we can do is strive to be better ourselves. But you can only be better from the moment you're in.
Yeah.
I could actually say, I used to do a handstand better than I do it now, because I didn't have certain issues in my body. But did I do it better? Physically, maybe, but maybe not mentally better. So I think we have to bring all of those levels together for that. And again, I still don't know if I answered your question. I picked a bit and I meandered.
No, you did. And it brings me to another question, which is the question of the feeling, and I don't agree with that, but the feeling that Ayanga yoga is obsessed with perfection. And you just answered us that this is not the case, because Ayanga never said that. The fact that we use tapas doesn't mean that we really go to after that perfection. The perfection might be defined completely differently. And again, the pandemic might have been a big teacher to help us understand what is perfection in yoga when you are in a pandemic.
I think also that Abhijata, when she taught us in May of last year, she taught us that don't go to what you expect you can do. Yeah. Be in the poses that support you. Later on, at the end of last year, she was getting more to the point of, well, you've done all those supported poses, don't just stay there forever. Now you don't want to get tamasic, you've now got to do something about it. I was working today with a group this morning, which included some trainees, and I was explaining to them that for beginners, quite often, they think they've done really well. As a teacher, we might look at them and think that there's things we can change, but they did really well because they did what we asked them to do. And then several years down the line, that same person doesn't think they're doing very well because we're digging deeper and we're giving them more depth in what their understanding is. So you can be corrected. I remember being corrected in Uttita Trikonasana 12 years into my teaching career and thinking to myself one day, should I be teaching? I'm still being corrected in Trikonasana. But then, of course, you realize that what they're doing is they're not correcting what you were corrected at 12 years ago, your beginner pose, they're correcting a deeper level. And so perfection is always, it's like infinity, you're not going to get there. But what you can always do is work towards improving. And improving doesn't just mean making the physical pose better, because sometimes we can make ourselves worse by pushing too hard. It's getting into the feel of it, the knowledge of it, the knowing of it. And it's when you know the pose that you can actually express it, not just in your own practice, but in your teaching. And I remember somebody saying to me once, I like watching you demonstrate, I've forgotten what the pose was, but whatever pose, I like watching you demonstrate this pose because I can just get the expression, I can feel what you're feeling. And I remember thinking, I didn't really want to demonstrate that because I don't feel I do it very well. But there's the difference, that what you think you might do well, if you think it on a physical level, it's different to the expression of what you're giving, which is on a different level, and people can still learn from that. And, you know, in Pune in 2019, just before the pandemic, Prashant was telling us that Light on Yoga is our full syllabus, everything in there. He said, but don't you expect to be like that, because this is Guruji in his body with his years of experience. And we sometimes look at those pictures and think, that's what I want to do. So I think when you look at the pictures in Light on Yoga or GEM or any of those advanced, I don't just mean the advanced, but even the beginner poses, but in those advanced teachers, I think what we have to say is, what's the expression of that pose? Mm-hmm. The very first time I went to Pune, I bought a photograph of Guruji. It's in my studio on the wall. And it was Ekapada Viparita Dandasana, where he's holding his foot. If I had my book close, I'd get it, but then I'd have to disturb you all. And I bought it because I looked at that pose and thought, wow, that's what I want to be like. And I didn't mean be able to do the pose. I meant be able to be that calm in a pose of that intensity, but just to look as though I knew the pose. That's what I saw in Guruji. And I think that's what we have to work towards, not perfection in the shape of the pose, but depth in the knowledge of it.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you very much. At this moment, I think I'd like to see if our audience have some questions, and then come back and ask you more questions. But let's see what comes from the audience. So if you have a question, just raise your hand. And Tessa, I don't see much of the people. So Tessa and Trish, please just unmute the person and have them come to the screen so they can ask their questions. Anybody? Or unmute yourself if you have a question. If nobody's unmuting yourself, just unmute and ask your question if we don't see you. There are many people on this Zoom, so it's maybe difficult to see if anybody has a question. Oh, there is a question. Could you show the booklet and give info or where to find it? Could you do that? Could you, Sheila?
Okay, so I don't have it here, but the thing is, the email that, basically, if you got the email from me or directly from Liz at Artemis Yoga, if you scroll down on the bottom, you would see this. And this COVID-19 recovery booklet, you can find it on the IY UK website. So the Ayanga website is ayangayoga.org.uk. So ayangayoga.org.uk. And to find this, if you go along the top border, you'll see Ayanga Yoga. Thank you. Trisha's put it up on the screen.
Oh, great.
And then you need to go to the therapy pages, or it might even go direct to the COVID, but it is in there. And you know, if anybody is really desperate to find that, so Barbara, you can email me, and you can email me and you can ask me, and I'll send you the link, direct link to the page.
So there is another question in the chat, and that question is, how do you get beginners to stay with Ayanga yoga?
Tricky question, huh?
Yeah.
So the first thing is, when I first started teaching, and that is 45 years ago now, I remember feeling really disappointed if somebody came to a couple of lessons and didn't come back. I felt it was my fault. But actually, the first thing is that you don't necessarily, everybody that comes isn't necessarily meant to be there. They're coming to try it out. But there are some tactics you can use. And I think one of them is to be friendly and not to expect too much. So because I work with trainees, I'm often having to explain to them what I'm doing. So if a beginner comes and they've got lots of things wrong, I might correct them a little bit, but I don't correct everything, because then they feel they're not good enough. If you correct them all the time, they're not good enough. So you don't ignore them, but you don't give them too much to do all at once. If you've got a small child and you give it lots of tasks, it can't do any of them. But if you give it one or two, maybe the child can do those tasks. But you add more, it will even forget what the first thing was. So that's one thing with a beginner. So yes, be friendly, be welcoming. And when I say be friendly, I don't just mean when you say hello when they come in. I mean, yoga is, I've even said to some of my classes this week, you choose to be here. This is not meant to be sort of, oh, I can't remember the word now, but where you are enforced to work. So you choose to be here, and I am guiding you the best I can to help you. And so that's what I do. And if somebody does something wrong, I don't shout at them, I encourage them. And if they don't come back, maybe it's not the right time. So I've got a beginner student at the moment who, well, she's not that much of a beginner really, but she was a beginner. And she came to me and said, I wish I'd kept it up, because I've had about 10 years since I did yoga, and I've been out of it, and now I wish I'd kept it going. But the thing is, there's no reprimand. She's now back, so we work from that point. Mm-hmm. And again, yeah, don't give your beginners too much. Oh, but the other thing is, don't make it boring. One of the things that Gita told us, it's motion before action. So motion first. With your beginners, do lots of repetitions. Don't do Trikonasana and hold it so you can give every single point that you know on Trikonasana. Do it 5 times. Let them go in and come out, go in and come out. Feel it. Beginners want movement. And if you give them too much of static, they do get bored, because they hurt. They hurt staying in the pose too long. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. This is really, your compassion comes through in those answers. This is really very, very nice. Thank you very much for that. Any other?
I have to just say, Rahel, a few people have said to me, you're so patient. I think it's yoga that gives me the patience. But at the same time, it doesn't mean that I'm compassionate with everybody. I mean, I am on the surface, but sometimes inside, I'm a bit rattled by people who don't listen, but I don't let that show on the surface. Mm-hmm. Because, yeah, then it creates a tension between us. Sorry, tension. Sometimes they want attention, but if I get rattled by that, then tension is created. Yeah. I didn't see that question at all. I was talking.
No, so if anybody has other question, you know, I said you can unmute yourself, raise your virtual hand, or you can put it in the chat. So we had a few questions in the chat. Is there anybody else who wants to ask question to Sheila? Any questions? And please don't be shy. Just as you see, this is a conversation. We're all in this together. We are trying to understand a little bit more of what's happening in our world with the COVID pandemic. So
I just put a question in the chat.
oh, you did, Janice. Could you say it, please? Could you just ask your question? Because I didn't see it.
Okay, it was to Sheila.
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't. Sorry, I'm not very good at the chat thing.
That's okay.
Okay, so just say it, Janice. Why don't
Okay. Have you experienced, or how have you experienced your students or colleagues transitioning from this apprehension to an okayedness? I mean, that's my word I just made up.
Sorry, apprehension of what?
Well, the COVID and then the different way of practicing. And since they're on Zoom,
Right.
Are they doing it right? Are they getting it right? Are you paying enough attention to them? All those things, whatever.
Yeah.
And then did you have any experience that you went like a breath, not so much self-congratulatory, but a breath that says, perhaps to you, this is good for them, or this is good, I'm seeing this. I don't know if that's clear.
I didn't hear that last bit, sorry. After the
Well, it's gone because I just pay attention to what I'm saying.
Okay, no, a little bit
That
of
is
it
good
went
for
off
them.
a bit, but
That is good for, it's almost like how good it is that it's good for them. I've seen this shift and it's resulted in something good for them.
it's always nice when that happens, but you know, I think one of the things you've got, well, certainly what I do is I don't want to take all the credit for that. But what I feel I am is somebody who passes on what I learned from my teachers, and my teachers were first Lillian Biggs, my mum, Jean Maslin, Guruji, Gitaji, Prashant. All of these are classed my teachers. Now I pass on what I learned from them to help somebody else, and if they get that sense of something changed, something happened, it's congratulations to them.
That's what I said.
Yeah, and not, oh good, how am I, because that happened. But I like the fact that I was a part of it, don't get me wrong, but you can't take all the credit. You're just a conduit on the way. But in terms of what happened with the teachers on Zoom or in the studio, there was definitely apprehension, people coming to Zoom to start with. Some of my regular classes were very small. Others will probably have had the same. And when we went back to the studio, there was still apprehension about, am I safe going back into the studio? And I think what we have to do is we have to abide by, I guess, what we call regulations. I won't call them rules. Safe practice. And safe practice means how we deal with the surroundings, but also how we practice for safety in our asanas. And that way builds the confidence in them to proceed. So for instance, on Zoom, I think some people felt very unsure to start with. But as long as you don't, you sort of work with them and you don't pick up on everything, you let them know that you can see them, but you're not finding fault all the time. I think one of the things about Ayanga yoga we have to be really cautious about is we are very good fault finders.
Yeah.
But the problem is the fault finding is only the beginning of the journey. You're not meant to find a fault and leave it there. You're meant to find a fault to make it better, to change it. And I think as long as you can do that part of it, people then get a little bit more confident with you. Yeah.
So Sheila, as the last question came in, and the question was, what is special to you about Mr. Ayanga's way of teaching asana? It's a huge question for our last question, but if you
it's
could
a huge question.
try to answer that in a minute.
I think I have to include Gitaji in this.
Yeah.
And if I could make a comparison, even they are, of course, excellent teachers, gurus, but at the same time they had a difference. Guruji made you want to do. If you were in his presence, you never felt like I didn't want to. You wanted to do your best and to do what was required and asked of you. And he only had to walk near you for your asana to improve. But if you got a smack, that really made you smart. And I don't mean smart as in tingle and what have you, but smart as in clever in that area as well. But one of the things that I found from Guruji, and I learned from my mum, was that sometimes he wouldn't give you the answer. He wants you to find the answer. He would tell you what to do, how to do, but he wouldn't answer the questions. So I remember a time in Pune where he was showing something, my very first time in Pune, and he was showing something and he did one thing and then he did another thing. He said, see this and that, now you know. And I thought, oh, actually, I'm not actually sure which is the right one of what he's just shown me, because I was quite a new person in his in his class. And of course, my mum was right behind me and she nudged me and told me which she felt was the right one. Gitaji, on the other hand, she wouldn't let loose until you understood it. She would keep, do you understand? Do you know what's going on? Will you change it? And similarly, she also had a presence that made you want to do. So I think, to me, that although they had different ways about it, it was being in their presence. You didn't want to let yourself down, but let them down. There was an expectation of doing your best.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And just one thing I remember really clearly, just after my mum died, and it was just after, we were in Pune and my brother was there for the first time in the classes. So I'd been there a few times. Our mum had been meant to be with us in the class, but she'd passed away before we got there, a couple of months before. And Gita was standing in front of the both of us. My brother was quite stiff in the shoulders and stiff in the arms. And we were doing Urdhva Mukha Svanasana. And Gita was telling him to lift your chest and roll your shoulders back. And she was going at him. To an outsider, they would think she was being harsh on him. But I was watching her and she was looking at him with that real care in her eyes that meant, I know this is going to help you. And even though he was struggling to do it, she went on and on, giving him, you have to get this lift, open your chest, do more, do more. And it was just that look. And she gave me a glance as she walked away. And I knew that she was doing it for his benefit.
Mm-hmm.
And he wanted to do it, to be the person that could step up to the instructions that were being given. So yes, being in their presence was quite, a lot of you here I know will have been in presence of both of them. Some of you might have only been in Gitaji's presence, maybe some of you not at all, but absolutely it was something very, very special that made you want to work and stick with your yoga.
So I want to give you the last word, Sheila. So if there's anything you want to add before I close the meeting, the few things that I want to say as I close the meeting, is there anything you want to say?
I can't think of anything offhand, but I could talk for a very long time, so you better not ask me.
So I
just think stay with it. I'll give you one little thing to just whet your appetite here. And this is many years ago, probably about 20. So I'd already been doing about 25 or so years of yoga, or even more than that. And I remember we were at an event that was nothing to do with yoga. It was to do with my husband's works colleagues. And one of them said to me, "Oh, what are you doing now? Are you still doing yoga?" And I said, "Oh yeah." They said, "I thought you'd have learned that by now. You'd be onto something else." And it's just like, you know, how deep is the ocean? It's like, no, we haven't learned it yet, any of us. We're in the process. So that's really all I would say. Stay with it. There's more.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Sheila, for that inspirational talk and for all the amazing tidbit and also wisdom that you imparted us. I want to close by saying that I want to thank the Ayanga Association of New England at Artemis Yoga for the support. We need a strong community to be able to live and flourish in the world, and we added some part of our community with Sheila here. And we need to remind ourselves that we are all interconnected, and it is in our interconnection that creativity, healing, and maybe contentment can flourish. So it's a reality of hope that together we are stronger in a sense. And let me announce also that Stephanie Kirk from Sydney, Australia, is a well-known and respected teacher, will be our guest on Sunday, November 21st. And please note that the time is going to be 5 p.m. Eastern time. I'm sorry for the European, because she needs to be in Sydney, it's 14 hours later. So, but it will be recorded. So thank you very much, everybody, for coming, for participating. And thank you so much, Sheila, for all your knowledge and for your willingness to be part of this. Thank you.
Thank you for inviting me. It's been lovely to meet you, Rahel, Liz, Trish, and all at Artemis, and also all those lovely people out there, because a lot of them, I haven't been able to see your faces, but a lot of people, I know, occasionally a face has popped up that I recognize. Thank you.